Alright everybody, welcome back to another Ask a Dev Unreal Engine tutorial. My name is Kevin. Today we are going to be doing something a little bit with Unreal, but mostly about game dev and the fundamental understanding of how version control works. This is specifically with our friends in the indie, solo, and noob category. So if you're an indie, solo, or noob, you're just coming out of school, you've never worked with version control, you're an indie or solo, and you're not using version control, this is my pitch. This is my explanation as to why I think it is worthwhile for you to use version control and or learn about it before your first job. So we're going to break this up into what is version control, a comparison of version control for film versus game, and then I'm going to take you on a quick tour in Unreal Engine as to why and how powerful it can be for your project. So with that, let's start with a very simple explanation of what version control is. All right, so let's break this down into three quick parts. We have the overall idea, which is basically this is like a network attached storage, if you will. It's a place to save all of your files. And usually that is put on a different machine, maybe on your same network, so like network attached storage, or it's sometimes in the cloud. Reason for that is security, backup, redundancy, all the big things, so you don't lose any of your data. Now, one thing to note about the overall system of version control, that file storage location is often referred to as the repo, which is short for repository, or you'll also hear it called the depot. And basically, I'm also going to refer to it in the context of an analogy like a library. And there's a reason for that. So that's kind of like the whole package, what it is. So now you have this file library repo sitting on the cloud somewhere or on a network drive. And basically what you're looking at is just like I have up here, you have, if you think about it, this is just a common Windows Explorer. We have our file system. And the only difference between this file system and the way a version control file system works is if we, for example, go to this same folder. So here you can see we have game features, Seraphine's Quest, content, game. If we go to Seraphine's Quest, content, game, which is down here, what you'll notice is we have the same files. They're all listed. Now, the difference is they have a different state. That's going to be the control part about it. We'll talk about that in a second. But the big thing is when I click on this file, this blueprint 2D hero pawn file, you'll notice over here on the right, this file also has a history. This is where the version part comes in. Every file that you put into your depot or your version control, you basically are creating a version. And you can see each of these versions get time-stamped and dated, and they all have comments. Hopefully you use very descriptive comments so you know exactly what was happening. Like for example, this was when the project was created, this is the initial check-in, and this was a pre-build clean as an example. Now, the cool thing about this versioning is I have a history, and I can also get any point in time in the history I want to. So that's the version aspect of it. Let's not belabor that too much. Now let's talk about the control part. So basically what we have is we basically have network attached storage in the cloud, usually, or on a separate machine that is version. The control part is where this becomes powerful. And the way I want you to potentially think about it, if you're trying to wrap your head around this, is the way this works is the controls is the set of rules that allow us to work together on the same project and sometimes even the same files. So what do I mean by that? If you and I are both working on the same project, let's say our supervisor comes to us and says, hey, I want you to work on this animation. We both need to work on the same animation because they forgot or whatever. When I go to work on that animation, the work that I do while you're doing the same thing because you're working on a different character, when we're done, how do we reconcile that? It's very difficult. So wouldn't it be great if when I sat down to work on the cloth animation while you're doing the hair animation, for example, I knew that you were using that file? And you can do that. So this is where we get to the library analogy. When I sit down to start working, one of the aspects of the control part of version control is I can say, I'm checking this file out, just like a book in the library. Okay, so I'm checking that book out. Now, here's the difference. When I check that book out, what happens is it sends a message to the system, and you will notice in here, as an example, there's a check mark next to this. So the next person who comes to work on the Blueprint 2D Hero pawn, if they go to try to work on this file, it tells them, hey, this file is currently checked out and it's being worked on, and if you mouse over it, it'll show you it's being worked on by, in this case, Kevin, me. And then you can say, oh, well, I can't work on it then. I need to go talk to that artist or dev or whoever it is to see how long you're going to be working on it and potentially work on something else. So that's one aspect of the control about this. And just to kind of help give you an idea of how this works, going back to our library analogy, what happens with version control is when you sit down to start working on the project, the library is in the cloud, right? When you start on your local machine, one way that this is often set up is you get a copy of the entire thing. The whole project comes down, or at least all the parts you need. And you basically have a full copy of the library. So when you check out a file, what happens is your library tells the system to tell everybody else who has a copy of that library that you've checked that file out. So I can still read the files. If I'm on a different machine, I can still use them and work with them, but I can't see the changes you've made yet. When you're done making your changes, you say, I'm done, and you check that back in. You push it back into the library that's on the cloud. By doing that, what that will do is it will update it, and then I will see that if I'm working on a different machine, and I can say, oh, I need their new animation, for example, and I can say, well, let me grab that, let me get the latest version, and then everything is clean, nothing's checked out, I can check it out, and now I can work on it. So that's one aspect of the control, basically this handshake of when files are being used, who's locked out when, and some of the rules that are involved with that. Now, obviously, there's lots of stuff you can do with permissions as well. Some groups and some people might need permissions to work on some files, and maybe it's best if others don't have access to certain files. So there's all the usual access and security and everything like that. And one of the other great ones is when you're working with, for example, text files. You can actually do cool things like take a look at what the differences are between what was there now and what you have locally and what is in the repository or in the cloud. Or you can also go back in history. So let me give you an example. This default gameplay tags, this is an INI file that Unreal uses to keep track of new game tags and stuff that you're using as you're building your experience. If we wanted to go see what changed between version 9 and our current version, if I just what I can do is I can use a tool, it's called a diff tool, to find the differences, and what it will do is it will highlight all the changes that have been made. So for example, you can see the one on the left is version 8, the one on the right is version 9, and you can see the green means it was added. Usually red or another color means it was taken away, so you can see here, somebody added an AoE attack, somebody added jump again, jump cancel, jump to target, primary attack, wall grab. So a bunch of new tags were added. So we have the ability to communicate effectively across team members to tell each other who is working on what files so we don't actually accidentally stomp on each other's toes. We have all the permissions, the file controls, security settings, and everything like that. And we have a bunch of cool tools like this that allow us to do differences and other things between files that we can use. And that is basically the overall idea of version control, the version part of it and the control part of it. And that kind of is what all goes together to make up the version control experience. Now, there are different version control software out there. For example, we have Git and we have Perforce, and there's Subversion and all these things. Generally speaking, I would say predominantly a lot of people use Perforce, and that's largely because Perforce is very friendly to binary files. It understands binary files well, it works very fast with binary files. Git, on the other hand, has historically not been, although recently they have created some new beta stuff that works with binary files. I'm going to say this, I know this is going to potentially make some waves. If you are just starting out as a noob, an indie dev, or a solo, and you're trying to wrap your head around version control and setting up your own pipelines and things like that, I think Perforce is much easier to understand. Get is powerful. I use it. I use both. But Get, I've talked to seasoned engineers who at least echo back to me that Get is not as simple to understand as, for example, Perforce. So I know that's going to make some waves, but that has also been what I've noted just generally around the industry. Perforce is generally used and known and understood by artists and generally less technically savvy people. Get, super powerful, awesome tool, but it does take some time. So before I make any more waves, let's go ahead and take a look and move on to the differences between film and game dev, real-time experience, etc., and why those differences exist. And we'll try to make this fairly succinct. So when you're working on a film, we need to understand at least a few pieces of the pipeline to understand why it's set up the way it's set up. So if you think about a shot, and you can think about a shot in a movie as a single camera position. So if the camera is looking at your subject and it changes, that's a new shot. So when you look at a shot and you're working on like a VFX project or something like that, there's a lot of elements that come together to make up that shot. So you have your plates, you have your CGI, your cloth, your hair, the green screen. The plates, by the way, those are the original. That's the original footage that was shot on set. Then you have, you basically have all of these things that get basically composited together. So you have a compositor that takes all these elements and composes them together to make the final shot. Now, as you're working in production, you have deadlines. And so we need to get a shot in front of the client to show them what we're doing so that we can get approval so we know to keep going. All right, great. So we're all cranking out these versions, animation's working, VFX is working, etc. And then the compositor is taking all that stuff and putting it together, and then they kick off a render. Or another example is, there's many examples of this. The compositor kicks off a render. They're using a version of the animation that you've created, plus the cloth and all those things. But while they're rendering, because it can take a long time sometimes, you got notes from your animation supervisor. Your animation supervisor wants you to make some changes for the next version. So you start making changes, you save that, you put it out there. Now that render that the compositor has already kicked off, halfway through, all of a sudden the animation changes. So now there's a big hitch in that shot and we can no longer send it to the client. Now, there's a lot of stuff about how a pipeline gets set up to help deal with this, but this is why a lot of times in film, the way it works is you work with version files, version 1, 2, 3, 4, 500, however many versions there are. So when, and there's a publishing system in a lot of places, pipelines vary. I'm not prescribing, this is just an example of how it works. And mostly in some of the differences in why, the foundational reasons of why there's a difference in sometimes in film thinking versus game. Okay, so we don't want to mess up somebody else's render, but we all still need to make progress. So there's usually some version of versions that are happening, as well as a publishing system, so that a person who, for example, is doing a render, or another great example is a cloth technical director. They're working on a cloth simulation. They're working with an animation that was done, and then you change the animation. Now all of a sudden, all their cloth is broken. They can no longer get the version to the compositor. So this is the reason why oftentimes, or at least one of the variations of film pipelines work very version. It's to always be able to reference a previous version, and it's done so that we can get them at the same time. And what I mean by that is, in the render farm or in the actual pipeline on the file system, all of the render servers are basically hitting the file system to get the same files. It's very difficult. You need access to all of the different versions because the compositor might be looking at version 22 and the cloth technical director might be looking at version 21 and the animator is working on version 24. So all of those things are live all at the same time. So the idea of getting a snapshot over time, it can be complicated. So that's kind of the way film is set up. There's a reason why it's version, and it has to do with basically a multitask, highly parallel workflow. All right, so now let's switch over to game. Game is, you can work that way. You can have versions and publish them out and stuff and so on. But one of the big things is there's a lot more we are all working on the same file in game as opposed to different files that all come together. And so, for example, I might update the character file, and then somebody else might go in and make a change to that. An animator can make a change, and then another animator can come in and make a change to that. And then on top of that, when you're ready to put all of this stuff in Engine, what happens is you go to export. When you export, it creates an intermediate file. Usually it's like an FBX file, but the point is it's a file format that the engine understands. So the engine reads that in, creates the engine version of that asset, like a skeletal mesh or a texture. It doesn't matter. Whatever works best for this example, for your discipline. Now, if you basically imported version 22 and then you made a version 23, now you have to go back to the engine, you have to update where the file's pointing to, and then you have to redirect it to 23 and then click re-import. Whereas if you work in a version control workflow where all the file is the same name, it is anim attack combo A. It's always attack combo A. It's not attack combo A, V1, V2, V3. It's attack combo A. And all the versions are stored historically in version control. But the final file is still called attack combo A. When I export that, it's going to be called attack combo A FBX. And when I import that into Unreal, it's going to be called attack combo A FBX. And then if I update attack combo A, I check it out from version control. Say I'm on version 9. I check it out. I do my changes, I check it back in. Now there's 10 versions in version control, but the file's still the same. So when I export it and import it, I don't have to change any of the links to the files. They all just work. So there's a fundamental difference in the pipeline requirements between game and film that exists. Now, this is, like I said, this is not prescriptive. This is not a hard line. There's crossover. You can create publishing workflows that work both ways, and there are mixes, but it's at least worth understanding some of the history, if you will, about where and why some of these changes came about and the differences in thinking for film versus game. And I think there's actually a lot to be learned from both sides for different reasons, but that's why, and that is why version control, especially for assets and workflow in real-time experiences in game dev, is much more predominant versus a fully versioned flat file system that uses just a ton of file storage. So that kind of covers a little bit of the differences between film and game thinking and the logic behind it. So with that, let's hop into Unreal. And let's take a look at some of the really cool tools that we get as a result of using version control and why I think it's worth the effort to set up for your solo or indie project. So let's go. Okay, here we are in Unreal Engine, and where we are, just for reference, is we're in the Seraphine's Quest content game folder. This is that BP2D hero pawn. We were looking at that over here in version control. You'll notice in version control in Perforce, we have a check mark on it. It's checked out because I'm working on it. If we go back to the engine, you'll notice that it also has a check mark on it. Unreal Engine understands version control. So huge win there. That's great. We don't have to do any work. We can actually check things in and out and see the status of stuff right here in Unreal Engine. But overall, my pitch to you as to why you want to use version control comes down to one thing: peace of mind. All of everything I'm going to talk about now all comes back to peace of mind. So as a result of the way version control works, if my machine melts down, it's fine, because all of my stuff is stored in the cloud. And this has happened to me. I've lost my entire computer. And that is why over time I have learned to work with version control and storage systems. So if it melts down, version control has my back. I'm good to go. All right, that's one. Second off is the day-to-day use of the tools. As an example, the way they are integrated is awesome. Remember that diff tool where I showed you we could look at the difference between the tags? We can do the same thing with the blueprints, and it's awesome. So if we take a look at this pawn, for example, and there's sort of a lot going on in this pawn, but what I can do, because version control is integrated, up here in the left, on the top left, I have this diff, and it's for difference. When I click on diff, if I want to look at what the difference is between version 5 and the version that I have, this will bring up a visual diff tool. This works a lot like the highlighting that I showed you for the text file, except it's all visual. So if I click on defaults, these are all of the things that change. So you can see, for example, my ground speed thresholds changed. What is it that changed? So this camera rotation lag speed, it went from 10 to 0, for example. So I can basically quickly look at this. And why this is awesome is, as I'm working, if something all of a sudden breaks and stops working, I think, what did I do? Well, now I can do a diff. Maybe I went away to get a coffee, I had to walk the dog, it doesn't matter what it is. When I come back, I'm like, wait, what did I change? Why did it break? Sometimes you're just working really fast. The other thing is, if we take a look, and this is the just insane part, if we look at the event graph, this even works in the event graph. Now, if you don't use Unreal yet and stuff like that, it's visual scripting. This is pretty incredible to be able to do overall. But basically what we have is this is my local revision on the right, and this is what's in the library, the version control library up in the cloud. And if we zoom in, you'll see it highlights the areas that are different. So if we look at this area and we zoom in, it kind of keeps them in sync. You can see we have this new reroute node. As I pan this over, we added a bunch of stuff for, it looks like, climbing, wall grabs, and stat tags. That's because I redid the entire wall grab system. If we scroll down here, you can see everything that's red over here, I deleted on the right. These things no longer exist. What was it I was deleting? And I can come back here and I can look at it, and it basically, this is all a bunch of wall grab stuff that I was working on because I was basically rebuilding the wall grab system. So overall, when I look at this, if I walked away and I came back and I couldn't remember, or I was working on another system and I come back and I couldn't remember what changed, or something's broken, I can look at it and say, oh, here's what's changed. And here's the even crazier thing. Let's just say that I'm in a state where it's broken and I'm thinking, you know what? I just need to go back. I need to go back to a working state. Well, what I can do is I can say revert, which basically means give me the latest version from that storage library, from that the repo, the repository, the depot, the library. Give me the latest version and get rid of all the changes I've made. So really, and that's it. That's the pitch. I know that seems like a quick little thing. It seems like a small thing in Unreal Engine and a fairly long explanation, but you have to know what version control is. I thought it would be useful to understand what some of the differences are between film and game, for example. And then when you see, once you have that context, being able to see this in Unreal Engine is awesome. So at the end of the day, my pitch to you, even as a solo or indie dev, is version control is worth it. It has saved me so many times from crashes, hard drive meltdowns, but even just my own self. It's also super beneficial if you ever decide that you want to work with other people on your project as a way to be able to share your projects out. Now, before we wrap this, I do want to at least talk about some of the realities of this, because I mentioned a couple of version control systems. In this particular case, I'm using Perforce. This is not an ad for Perforce. I don't get paid by Perforce. This is not an anti-ad for Get or anything like that. I personally think Perforce is easier for a smaller team or a more artist-friendly tool. Second, the real reason is Perforce came out with a system with an update a few years ago where if you have less than 5 or 10 users, I think it is, it's free. You basically set up your own stuff and then you can run it for free. Get is always free, so that's not really the win. But for me, because you had to pay for Perforce before, I wouldn't use it. But now that it's free, I use it. And then just to finish out or finalize my setup, I actually have a AWS server running in the cloud on the AWS Amazon Web Services system. It's a small server. I think it costs me when you look at the security settings and the size of the server, I think I pay $10 or $13 a month to have version control for my project that is backed up in the cloud that I can access anywhere I need to. So a bunch of our community members have also set up version control. They did it themselves. They did it on an extra computer they had, all kinds of stuff. For me, peace of mind, it's worth it. I pay the $10 and I have basically a fully functioning cloud-based Perforce system. So hopefully that was helpful to you all from a couple different perspectives. One, it helps explains to anybody who's solo, indie, or new about what version control is, how it works, what to expect when you get to the studio, so maybe you've at least heard of it. Secondly, this was my pitch for why I think it is good, even for small projects or solo dev projects, to have. It has been a lifesaver for me always. I know it might seem daunting, but I am here to tell you it has been worth it for me. So, as always, if you like what we're doing here, let us know. You have feedback on this video, drop it down in the comments down below. And don't forget to check out our live streams. A lot of our content is in the live stream section. My name's Kevin. Hope to see you all in an upcoming live stream. Take it easy.